But just for before we start, the political lead in this instant for the Victoria Street project. Is it you, Charles, or is it the mayor?
It's me.
Charles. Okay, just wanted to be clear on that. You lead in on this.
Yep.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the London Borough of Newham Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can everyone Okay. And the witnesses, can I start off with you and the mayor?
Sana Fiaz, Mayor of Newham, but also the portfolio lead for inclusive economy and strategic housing delivery. And just to clarify, in the context of Victoria Street, subject to the phasing, it then moves into community wealth building place in that directorate as it's being developed.
I'm Vicky Clark. I'm the Interim Corporate Director for Inclusive Economy and Housing.
Yeah, Councillor Shabam Mohammed, Lead Member for Housing Services and Modernisation, and Councillor in Cannington, Northwold.
I'm Conrad Hall. I'm the Corporate Director of Resources.
My name is Arnold Meager. I'm the Head of Law for Housing, Litigation and Employment, deputising today for Tavish Mystery, the Monitoring Officer.
Hi, everyone. The Head of Finance.
James Croft, Senior Development Manager.
And Darren?
Darren Levy, Director of Housing.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. This is a meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to consider a call-in of an executive decision made by Cabinet on the 5th of December 2023 on Victoria Street Option Appraisal Report, referred option. First item on the agenda, apologies for absence. Is there any apologies for absence?
Apologies from Councillor Shah.
Okay. Any other apologies? That noted? Declaration of interest. Are there any members wishing to declare any interest? Clerk would note that there's no declaration of interest. Minutes. The purpose of this item is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of December 2023. I invite members to raise any specific correction or accuracy. Is there any member wishing? Okay. I therefore move that the meeting held on the 21st of December 2023 be agreed as a correct record.
Agreed.
Thank you. At this stage, can I ask that we change the order of the published agenda to take items 6, 7, 8 in that order? Is that agreed? Scrutiny Chair's report. Are there any chair who wish to make a report at this stage?
No.
Okay, and I myself do not wish to make a report at this stage. Appointments. I have 2 appointments to announce. Councillor Terry Paul and Councillor Lewis Godfrey be appointed to the Black Boys Task and Finish Commission. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. The annual scrutiny work program. Can we note the work program?
Noted.
Forward plan of key decisions. Is there any contribution to this item? No. And the date of the next meeting of the London Borough Review and Scrutiny Committee is scheduled to be held on the 15th of February. Is that noted? Thank you. We now move into the substantive item to deal with the calling, which is the Victoria Street Option Appraisal Report. The purpose of this item is to consider a calling of an executive decision made by Cabinet on the 5th of December on the Victoria Street Option Appraisal Report, the Victoria option. This item was called in for consideration by the Review and Scrutiny Committee in accordance with the provision of Rule 15 of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee Procedure Rules in Part 4 of the Council Constitution. The Overview and Scrutiny Committee may review the decision, the Cabinet decision, and thereafter may either take no further action or refer it back to the decision maker for reconsideration, setting out in writing the nature of its concerns. The meeting will be held in 5 parts. And for clarity, I would outline those parts briefly. The first part would be presented by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee outlining its reasons for the calling. The second part of the meeting is the executive would respond briefly to that, and both parties have 10 minutes each. The meeting would then, or the Scrutiny Committee would then question the executive on the rationale for their decision. Part 4, the committee would then go into committee stage to consider their option in terms of recommendation, whether they call in or not, whether the calling is upheld or not. And the last part is, once that vote is taken, then we would, and depends on the direction of the vote, whether there is no further action or whether we come up with recommendations. Is that understood?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Right. The resolution notice signed off, resolution, sorry, I don't need to say that at this stage. Okay. So at this stage, I would ask the Scrutiny Committee to present. And I was noticed that Councillor Terry Paul and Councillor Susan Master will be presenting for the overview and scrutiny committee. So over to you, Councillor Paul.
Thank you, Chair, and my comments will be directed to Councillor Mohammed. Why spend more money to house less people? Why demolish 219 homes and then build 122 housing units 4 years later when there is a supply crisis in temporary accommodation? Scrutiny is called in because the decision has the potential to undermine the ability of the council to look after person households and increase the pressure on stretched financial resources. The Cabinet decision has the ability to undermine the Newham financial stability in the short, medium and longer term. Scrutiny calls on the Mayor and Cabinet to demonstrate the required humility to reverse its decision on Victoria Street and reduce pressure on the council's limited and existing financial resources and challenges. From our own peer review statement, we state, and I quote, temporary accommodation is putting severe financial pressure on the council. From the recently published draft budget from the lead member for Finance's introduction, he states, Newham has the worst homelessness crisis in England, with the largest waiting list and people in temporary accommodation. 2, despite Newham putting in £10 million in this year's budget, Newham's TA costs are soaring and continue to escalate. He goes on further to say, combined with significant reduction in housing supply in Newham over the past 18 months, the cost of living is being felt acutely in Newham. This council is facing severe financial challenge, as evidenced by the current recovery budget programme and the challenge it faces on the scale and impact of temporary accommodation. Internally, staff are being briefed that next year's budget pressures will lead to at least £15 million plugging the TA budget gap, and that figure might even be higher. Staff have been warned about the potential of redundancies. Newham Council should use Victoria Street for its original intended purpose of temporary housing, although scrutiny suggests it is used for single people and couples without children. The needs of single people households residents must be met within Victoria Street by using the building for its original purpose. Reversing Cabinet's decision would protect 216 single person TA housing units, stop us spending £56.5 million on demolition, and within that figure, £3 million on consultants. I note we have already spent £1.2 million on consultants. Reversing the decision on Victoria Street would reduce future TA overspend by 400,000. This project actually increases our overspend. But more importantly, it would reduce our debt interest payments by approximately £3 million a year. Under occupation of Victoria Street since May 2022 has caused our temporary accommodation budget to be overspent by at least 1.2 million. Retaining and even reusing Victoria Street was an option from December 2022. That programme would have cost us £7 million. We could spend £7 million to reuse and build and provide appropriate support. £7 million, if we were to choose that option, is much cheaper than spending £60 million on a demolition option. From the council's own corporate performance report going to Cabinet next week, it actually states the critical area of higher risk in Q2 remains in managing the increasing numbers of residents in temporary accommodation. The 20% increase in homelessness applications this year due to the cost of living increases and a 47% reduction in private rented supply is impacting on the council's ability to keep numbers below the 7,000 projected increase in 2026. The figures I've outlined above provide a compelling case for the Cabinet to reverse its decision, which doesn't make business or financial sense in a time of financial challenge, as evidenced by the recently published budget. Even the rejected refurbishment option is much cheaper at 28 million. Scrutiny notes references to energy efficiency for the reason Cabinet decided on the demolition option, But I must remind the Mayor and Cabinet that our residents are facing a temporary housing crisis. They have nowhere to live, especially if you're single. Demolishing isn't a viable option for the current and future taxpayers of Newham.
As Chair of Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny, I welcome this call-in, which I backed in support of my fellow Chair, Councillor Paul. Contrary to what some might have read in other reports, my committee has always worked well with the Cabinet lead we hold to account. We're critical friends and I have the benefit of regular catch-ups on the work he and his officers are engaged in to help ensure our work programme focuses where it needs to. In one such catch-up recently, I was delighted to hear that our public health team were already acting in a one council way with our housing directorate's homelessness team, an ambition I'm sure we'd all applaud. Although we won't see our council's full peer review until March, an early headline is that they felt we needed a more joined-up approach to homelessness, and this co-working was about delivering just that. As Councillor Paul laid out, around a third of our homeless presentations come in from single adults. This is a sizable group of our residents. And as we prioritise homeless people with children, those single adults we do accept a housing duty to need to meet a high bar of need. They're people who frequently not only need a roof over their head, but equally additional support, whether this be looked after children leaving care for whom we have a duty as corporate parents, or those with additional mental or emotional needs. For these people, this joint working between housing and public health was proposing a situation of wraparound support within temporary housing. A fantastic idea, but for this to work, we need a building where people with similar needs can be wrapped around, a building like Victoria Street. Share the Mayor and Cabinet's desire that our temporary housing is of a high quality, and agree Victoria Street was totally unsuitable for families. But the bottom line is we need accommodation for all sections of our population now. And it's madness to talk about losing around 216 units of single accommodation completely for a 3-year period. We also know we're at the heart of a worsening storm of homelessness, where predictions of 30 presentations per month have already risen to 40 in the space of a few months. If we remove this option over a 3-year period, what will the alternative be? Well, for the most part, hotel rooms. Hotel rooms are not home. They lack those self-contained cooking facilities that support those with a variety of dietary needs, and that in the depths of a cold winter, prevent dependence on expensive hotel food or unhealthy takeaways for a hot meal, but equally provide refrigeration where needed for medications. A recent report from Public Health also revealed that housing issues were by far the underlying additional issue most raised with social prescribers and GP surgeries as a driver aggravating existing mental and physical health conditions. Back in December 2022, an option to keep Victoria Street for some necessary works and wraparound care was tabled for Cabinet, but rejected without any real consideration. It would have cost a mere 8 million. 20 million less than the refurbishment option that went forward, and a whole 50 million less than that option finally approved by Cabinet in 2023 to demolish Victoria Street and be without any facility for 3 years before having a mixed tenure offer. £50 million more. In 3 years' time, none of us know where we'll be. But between December 2022 and now, we've learned that we have developed a £47 million funding gap in our budget owing to a variety of demand pressures. Our budget papers tell us that robust financial management is at the heart of Newham's systems of management and governance. To that end, but also with compassion in mind for the care of our single homeless, I hope the Executive will welcome this call-in as an opportunity to pause, reflect and roll back on this decision, which calls upon resources we don't have to remove desperately needed resources for a notable period of time when repurposing to meet a defined need is the right thing to do.
Thank you. Councillor Mohammed, you now have 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Victoria Street was purchased in 2017, and it was the sole purpose of its sole purpose of the development was to be. It was purchased in 2017 for development purposes. In that time, it was used for temporary accommodation as a way of as a revenue stream. Now, I can fully understand the issues of Victoria Street, but I've been dealing, and the mayor's been dealing with those issues since 2018 when we come in, and dealing with families that we actually place in Victoria Street and dealing with their issues in terms of the size of the properties and and again, when we did have mixed couples and singles, having such a large building, dealing with all those issues and the management of those residents. So we have really looked at that. But one thing I would say, in housing, our acute need is more family-based accommodation. We don't simply have it, and the refurbishment is the demolition of Victoria Street and the rebuilding is vital to us going forward. And I think when you talk about singles accommodation, Councillor Masters, I think, again, those pathways, working with our health colleagues, actually having more wraparound support for singles with complex needs. We need to look at those paths and actually work harder, make sure that it's not about tenancy sustainment, how we deal with people with mental health issues, drug addiction, and again, putting them in and looking at their employment pathways as well, so they can actually sustain tenancies. Thank you, Chair. I was just going to bring Darren in on this as well, so if you wanted to say anything. Okay. Darren Levy. Okay, Darren.
Yes, just to reaffirm the intention is to deliver much needed family accommodation within the borough, and that's intention, and the recommended option is the one that delivers the most sustained and long-term accommodation for the future Newham families.
Okay. Is that the end of your presentation, Darren?
I wasn't intending on doing any further presentation. I think Councillor
Okay, that's it. I just want to be sure that you've completed. Okay, thank you. So that's the response by the executive.
And also, what I was going to say, in 2022, we did look at all the options around Victoria Street.
Okay.
So that is what we came. That's the conclusion we came to.
Okay, so that is your stated response. Now we move to question and answers. Okay, so the Scrutiny Committee will now ask the witnesses questions.
Thank you, Councillor Mohammed. As you may have detected from my presentation, we actually agree with you that Victoria Street is not suitable for families. Let's not argue about that. What we're saying is it should be used for its intended original purpose of single people. From your own data, approximately 38 to 40% of presentations are single people. From your own documentation, you would admit that the numbers are going to increase. So with that logic, why would you remove from your supply 216 units, demolish a site, make it a building site, when your need is going upward? Why would that be sustainable?
One of the things around that is, again, that's that single accommodation and that complex need. So, like I said to you, again, what we want to do is put our singles in the right pathways and give them the support that they need. And what we're going to be looking at is other options. But at the end of the day, you can't have to, I've seen developments where they do have large numbers of singles in. We've got one in Canning Town. And what I'll say to you, is it working? I don't think it is. What we need is a sustained pathway for singles and homeless people so they can sustain their tenancies.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Just to correct you. The council's own budget, your own figures are saying temporary accommodation is going to get worse. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Right, okay. Do you agree our numbers are about to go up?
I would agree with that. Go on.
Do you agree at the present projection, roughly 40% of presentations are single people? Would you roughly agree with that?
I would roughly agree with that. But what I would also,
talking over each other, please.
Right.
So based,
give each other time to
based on those three parts, Our temporary accommodation budget is going to get worse in the future. We're going to have less supply. We agree with you. It's not appropriate for families. Also, you said you looked at the option. You didn't fully look at the option because the option to retain and reuse is £7 million. All the documentation I've read, it says, and Councillor Masters alluded to it, looking at proper financial governance. £7 million would get you a facility with the appropriate wraparound care, and you wouldn't have to spend £50 million. I mean, this of capital and spend approximately £3 million a year on debt interest.
Like I said,
No, I'm sorry. I must give Councillor Mohammed a chance. Do you want to respond to that?
I'll let Councillor Martin, then I'll bring Vicky in for that.
No, I've seen, before you bring in, I've seen the mayor for us.
No, it's okay. I'll just, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Mohammed. I just really wanted to reinforce the point that Councillor Mohammed is making. We absolutely have a need for accommodation for single homeless people. But as we've already mentioned briefly, in order to be entitled to accommodation, if you are a single homeless person, then you are in all likelihood experiencing a number of other issues. The challenge with using Victoria Street to as a setting for a large number of those people is, as again we've already talked about, it's very important that those people are, or ideally those people should be put in a supported setting, which enables them to be given appropriate advice and care. And it is not straightforward to run a supported setting at that scale and in a building of the kind that Victoria Street is currently. So in the interests of setting our homeless people, single homeless people on a better path, it is far better for them to have smaller settings. And I would quite like to direct members to the detailed table at the bottom in key line of inquiry, in our response to key line of inquiry 3, which talks about the decant options that we've made available or making available to people that we are looking to move out of Victoria Street. Now, Darren Levy is probably better to talk about this in more detail because he is the housing services expert in the meeting. As you can see, we have been able to move a number of people across to different settings, and that those settings are not especially expensive to the council. They actually present a good value and they are able to offer a better outcome for those people in a small setting. So there is a good case for moving people out. That's thank you.
I would come in with a supplementary and building on what Councillor Paul says. Currently, we have a number of single people presenting to us as homeless and need temporary accommodation. And they are not all people with needs, and I need that you have to provide a service for. I asked the question at a previous meeting, and I was told that it's not suitable to provide, to use that accommodation for people with needs, a lot of people with needs, as you alluded to, and I fully get that. However, we don't have to pack that building with residents with needs. It could be a mixed tenure. Okay, it could be because people that present to us at times are working people, but for some reason they become homeless and they're not needing any support. They won't even need housing benefits most of the time because they can pay their own rent, etc. Have you considered those individuals?
Yeah, but what I would also say to you, Chair, is that prior to us purchasing it in 2017, Victoria Street, when it was used as a hostel for young people, it's had various iterations, right? What I would say to you, it's had various iterations. And
I'm not going back to 2017 or whatever. The question is, have you considered using it for singles and couple, and not necessarily those with needs, but mixing the tenure? Have you and keeping 216 units? Currently, you're putting down a building that has 216 units in a time where we need those units to rebuild something, and we're going to be losing 94 units. Have you considered that option?
I'll say to you, we had singles and couples and families in there at that,
Respect and councillor, you're not answering the question. Have you considered the option? Mayor, the question is directly to Councillor Ahmed. Okay.
The hand up for Darren.
Darren Levis.
Okay, I'll come to Darren. I'm asking you because you're the member responsible. Have you considered the option?
Well, like I said to you, we did have families. Again, we did have singles in, but
I'm taking it I'm not going to get an answer, so I move on. But the record will show that I've asked the question. Darren.
Just to confirm, our objective has always been to utilise the property for people who are homeless and need temporary accommodation, as opposed to renting it to the general public as private rented sort of property. So that we haven't explored that option because our intention has been to use the building for people who are homeless.
So when was that option explored, and where's the evidence that it was?
It wasn't. He said it was.
I just said it. What I just said, we haven't explored the option of using it as market rented, because the intention for the building is to utilise it as homeless accommodation.
Why would you?
And would you now that we are at the quarantine situation, now that you know that we have singles who are presented as homeless or needing temporary accommodation, would you consider, is that a possibility that that will be considered?
The intention for the use of the building is to we desperately need to have suitable accommodation for people who are homeless within Newham, and the intention of this exercise is to find the best solution for that building for that use.
Yeah, the question, but you haven't answered the question, and for this purpose, we need direct answers to questions. So I'm asking you, is there a possibility that you would consider that option?
I would need to discuss that with my cabinet member and the mayor. At the moment, the intention for the building is to utilise it for the use for people who are homeless and temporary accommodation.
It's professional view. Professional view.
Okay, so can I now ask you, what is your professional view?
My professional view is that we need to utilise the property for use of people who are homeless and desperately need temporary accommodation. That's the purpose of the building. The building was bought as an investment property, and we need to find the best potential use for that property going forward.
Yeah, Vicky.
With permission, Chair, I think what you're suggesting is that we should use the property to house at full capacity to house single homeless people, acknowledging my point about it being not suitable to have that many people with significant issues in the same building, that it should be people with sort of people who, for the most part, are single homeless but do not have significant issues. Now, my understanding, and I will call on Darren to confirm this, is that because of the way our housing duty is defined, we do not, in general, have a duty to house single homeless people unless they have significant issues. So we do not have a significant TA client base, if you like, of single homeless people who are in general terms able to support themselves and manage and pay rent, because that's not that the duty then doesn't come to us. We acquit our duty to them in a different way. Darren, am I representing that correctly?
Yes, in terms of the density of the building, to house that many people who we've accepted homeless that are singles and couples, for all the reasons you've just outlined, Vicky, we don't feel would be a suitable management option, no.
Right. Yeah, I'll give way to my colleagues and then I come back on that because I'm not yet familiar with your answer. Councillor Masters, then Councillor Booker.
I just want to come back on the numbers here, because in your responses to our key lines of inquiry, you're saying that currently we have around 1,400 people who are homeless. Now, given pressures upon the private sector and getting property sort of close to home at the moment, I don't see how we're going to get these kind of smaller buildings to deliver its care. It's a luxury we don't have at the moment. And the idea that we're sort of giving away this unit of 216 units just seems crazy. And also, I noted, Councillor Mohammed, in your presentation, you were talking about wraparound to help maintain their tenancies. Well, surely the people we're talking about are people who have found themselves homeless. They're already out of the tenancies, and our experience as councillors is as well that unfortunately, even when people are facing threats to their tenancies, a lot of the time, because of the weight of need, there isn't that kind of day-to-day sort of support there in terms of sort of achieving that. And you're still going to have a sizable proportion of people who have been evicted, who we're sort of dealing with, and then need that support in place, which is the kind of model that we're talking about. And I mean, having read the papers again for the December 2022 meeting, I just don't think that was properly explored at the time. There's about a paragraph on it, and then we move on. And by the time we get to the 23 options, not even considered. There's not even, a proper breakdown of the number of units involved. I mean, the bottom line is that we're talking about over 215 units that could provide homes to what at the moment, according to this, is 1,400 homeless people. So to just dismiss that just seems incredible at a cost of monies that we just don't have at the moment.
Mayor.
If I may, just to contribute to elaborating on the points that Darren, Vicky and Shabs made. It is understood that there is a significant TA crisis facing Newham and all authorities in London because of a wider context, including the inefficacies of housing policy and what the government is doing. Everyone can accept that. Everyone accepts that the pressure in TA, as being witnessed now, wasn't anticipated at the scale in terms of forecasts in the period running up to December 2022, but has emerged in the 2023 year at a scale that, is challenging every single local authority. We understand that. The crucial point is this. Yes, there are, in aggregate, the 1,000 plus households of the single or two-person adult description. And it is true, the professional expert advice, either housing and arguably people that operate in the health and well-being, mental health space, is it right for a building that has 219 units in a building, dare I say, that is near and coming to near end of life, and we're going to have to make an investment in that unit in any case at some point? Is it right to concentrate camp-like 219 people with the range of vulnerabilities that we are predominantly getting? We would like to have a provision where we can place households, the vast majority of which are households with children, family-sized households, in suitable accommodation. And the officer view and their operational practice is that you would not use one singular building of this scale to house that significant number of vulnerability because of the one risk it presents.
Can you run that, please?
Those individuals or those couples, those households, but also the management complexity that will be required on a site that is just not fit for purpose for that type of resident, because we want to indeed help them with the appropriate pathway to make them better, to give them stability in their lives, and with an eye to the long term. Yes, whilst we contend with the TA pressures and we put in mitigations, and we're doing lots because there's lots putting in.
Can we round up, please?
Lots of additional measures that have been put forward in the draft budget proposals. Those are all coming forward. It's not just one or the other. It's a multiplicity of interventions whilst we develop and deliver for good quality, well-designed homes that our families that are facing homelessness and are living in temporary accommodation.
I'm asked twice to round up. Okay. Thank you. And Councillor Booker next.
Thank you. It felt like there was a bit of a confusion around the chair's question in terms of the answers. I don't think he was confused around who we were talking about. And there's obviously the homeless population and the single homeless population having significant needs in order for us to have a housing duty for them. But I think that the chair was asking a broader question of, have we thought about things that are not necessarily to do with housing vulnerable homeless people, but as a way of being an income generation after presumably a little bit of doing up, to help alleviate the pressures that we have on housing generally, not just for people that have high needs necessarily, and then using that 50 million plus the income generation that you would get presumably from having some really good, pretty cheap rents to single and couples, which would be great housing for us to have in the borough, and use that for investing in temporary accommodation potentially elsewhere outside of London, maybe where it's much cheaper.
I was just going to come in on that. I think when we did make this decision, we reviewed all the options, including we worked with our officers, and those options were explored, and we were looking at also working around putting professionals in. But again, it weren't viable. We didn't get the.
And what was the thing that it was not?
Well, basically, I think the main thing is, again, the way the building was designed and the size of the rooms, and they were, again, too small.
I remember seeing something relatively recent about the impact. There's I think it's called the Something Land Trust. And it's about putting artists into accommodation in London, particularly in places where they normally wouldn't actually be able to necessarily afford, and how by investing in the culture of the area, by putting artists in, actually it raises the whole area as well. So there's kind of a social impact in terms of investing in our culture too, through that sort of a scheme. I presume that you thought of all of those different options.
I would come in with a supplementary there. Anyone listening to this might run away with the impression, based on your presentation and your responses, that these single people are either presenting mental health or social issues, and therefore you cannot house them. That's the impression that you are given, whether it's intentional or unintentional. That's the impression. So I'm going to ask you a question pertaining to that. What's the number of people that are presenting within the 1,000 trust, that once you give them the property, because they are presenting as homeless, that you need no further intervention to help them socially or mental or any health issues? What's the number?
I'll bring Darren Levy on that. Darren?
That's simply something I'm not going to be able to say, because I can't estimate across 1,400 or so people exactly what interventions all of those different people require. That's an impossible question to answer at this stage, so I wouldn't like to sort of hazard a guess.
What you're doing, you're presenting to this committee that you cannot house those people who are single. Is the impression is they have some need, either social or health issues, and to concentrate all of them is not viable. And I get that. Now, what I'm asking you, for you to make that determination, you have to have an idea. It's either all of them or some of them. So to present what you're presenting to us, now quantify it. So when we go to deliberate, we can take the quantity that you're giving us into consideration to see whether we agree with you or not. So if you cannot quantify it, therefore your decision is flawed. Because your argument is potentially flawed that you're presenting to us.
Would it be?
You want to comment on that? Or I go on?
So, but
Yes.
just to clarify, the position that we're stating is that a block of 216 units, which would house 216 households of single people or couples, if they're coming through the route of being accepted as homeless by the council, to be an adult and is accepted as homeless, you have to fulfill a number of criteria within the homelessness legislation. And we're saying that that is too high a density to be practical to manage for that scale of sort of portfolio. That's the position. If it was a block of 40 or 50 and we've got 50 or 60 sort of singles and households living there, it would be perfectly manageable. We're saying the block is too large for that type of cohort.
But and Darren, the question that I asked, you just say you don't know the number, yet you're presenting the same argument. Because if you don't know the number, it could be 2. We don't know, and you don't know either.
They're saying that they don't accept a housing duty for people that aren't high needs.
So, anyway, I give way to my police councillor Nevis.
Yeah, we've got the figure.
Yeah.
Worked it out.
Okay, I'm going to yeah. What's the figure?
616.
Who need or doesn't need in council intervention?
Those are the people who have additional needs, which would mean 56% who don't have needs.
So therefore,
47% don't have needs.
thank you.
About the double the number of units that's.
Okay, so are you going to dispute that? And if you don't dispute that, are you then going to accept that the 47% of the people that you can put in there and you don't need any further intervention, therefore they do not fall within the needs, and therefore you can consider?
What I would say to you, we can't accept a calculation, and I think again we've got to go back and look at those figures.
These are your own.
Figures.
These are your own. Can I just say, Chair? We have used your own figures. I just say we've asked the housing director to justify his figures, and he's been unable to do it. Members here, using your own figures from your own service, Councillor Mohammed, have worked out a figure, right? So, roughly 47% of people who present are single persons, do not have any needs. And actually, I want to say, and Councillor McCormack beat me to it, let's not beat down on people who happen to be homeless, okay? Let's not take an assumption that they have needs. Just want to put that on the record. So 47% of people who present out of the 1,400 are just okay. We are wanting to bulldoze 216 units, which could house those people. There are people out there with nowhere to live. And we as a council, a Labour council, are wanting to bulldoze a site, spend £56.5 million, and for 3 years, put them, I don't know where, away from, I'll make the point and finish, away from their place of support. Now, we'll add, the ghost in the room is our financial situation. The budget has been produced. We have to cut we have a budget gap of a minimum of £47 million. This proposal in itself will increase our debt interest by £3 million, which is £3 million, which will not go into basic services. I just want to say to you, Councillor Mohammed, and the reason why I mentioned the word humility in my opening, because there are times in straightened times when we have to say a decision taken might have to change. We are facing a position in this council where services are going to be cut, but we as a Labour council are bulldozing 216 units where our people need those homes, and I find it incontrovertible.
Okay, all right. Come back and the mayor, then Vicky.
Okay, look, I would say if, as explained or as presented, that reality existed, I'm sure any reasonable, rational person would understand the logic. I don't think it's appropriate for us to accept at face value a calculation based just on our numbers. Because if you go back to the key lines of inquiry, and if you specifically look at the response under the table to question key lines of inquiry 3, and as has been stated earlier, there are assessments relating to homelessness duty that the council then commits to. And assessment factors include personal circumstances that must be taken into account due to the assessment of suitability of a TA offer, e.g. support needs, medical needs, child protection, key stage exams, etc., etc. That is a definition of vulnerability and risk, whether you want to accept it or not accept it. And it's not about downing on individuals that are facing, circumstances of homelessness. It's about ensuring that we've got the right suitable accommodation for those residents in need. And in the context of single persons and those 2-person households, the predominant feature and characteristic are the assessment factors that are used. And similarly, and it is important not to lose sight of this, you would not want to group so many of that typology of individual couple because of that wide-ranging need. But I know that also Vicky wants to come in on this and just to clarify some points.
Yeah, so
Okay, I've seen my colleagues. All I would say to that, Mayor, you're talking about the figures that was presented by the overview and scrutiny team. You haven't presented us with those figures. I asked for that and you were unable to justify that. And what I find hard to believe, that all those people that present are in need of some sort. And therefore, and the argument has been put already that they don't all have a need, and therefore the property could have used to house those, to have a mixed tenure. And as that's an argument that I personally put, you have a mixed tenure, so therefore you cater for it. And without you being able to provide and substantiate the figure, and we've got these figures from the report, your documents that you've given.
Chair, to be clear, the problem is that we don't house those people. So they present and then we don't house them. That's the issue. And actually, I think that that's why I am concerned that we haven't looked at other things, to the fact that we have maybe 47% of the people that are presenting actually don't reach the threshold for us. And so why we're not looking at a mixture of options that would include saving 50 million plus getting revenue, why that wasn't one that we properly that was presented to Cabinet. I know that you say that it was said behind, that it was considered behind the closed doors, but why that isn't something that we've kind of seen, why that isn't viable, that seems sensible.
Exactly. And Councillor Livy.
Sophia, sorry.
Sorry, Vicky, sorry.
Amala, is it all right, Chair, to come in? I just had a couple of figures to draw your attention to. So we do have the figures for the remaining households who are still in Victoria Street. In terms of percentage of vulnerability, there are 79 households remaining, and 44 are recorded as having a member with a vulnerability. So that figure is, I've just done the maths, and that's just over 55% of households that are still in Victoria Street have a vulnerability currently. The other point I wanted to make is Councillor Paul says that we're sending people heaven knows where, or something to that effect. We don't know where we're sending people. There is a full answer in your question 3 in terms of where we have sent the people who have been Victoria Street. Everyone's destination is listed. So we have provided you with that information.
Who is responsible for Victoria Street decisions?
I am.
So you're okay. I'm still not understanding. I mean, it's been echoed throughout the council.
Yeah, what I was going to say to you is a cabinet decision. So any decisions we make, we do bring it to cabinet, and it's it's.
I still don't understand what is wrong with housing single people in Victoria Street. And also, one more thing I want to ask, in the light of the financial situations we are, and also the budget, is it still value for money for residents?
Well, I think at the end of the day, what I would say to you is we need to look at a lifespan of a building. We got an acute need for family accommodation. And one of the things that we want to try and do is we are building and buying. But for me, it's about trying to keep families in borough and also uplift our current housing stock as well. So we want to make sure that we're keep families in borough, and the effects sometimes, temporary accommodation is having on families when we having to move them around different parts. We want to make sure that we're keeping families in borough and supporting families, and also it's about the children as well. We need to make sure.
So you mentioned about the children, but there's so much budget going around, cuts going around. We are affecting the education too. If money's going down with the school situation too. So as overall the budget we've seen, are we really? Is this still deep down? Do you really think it's value for money?
What I will say to you again, it's building is not suitable for families, and for me,
We're not putting families.
I know what
Families in.
Okay, can I intervene here? The question put to you, do you think your actions represent value for money?
Well, what I'll say to you again, it's about making sure that we have good, safe, secure, passive house standards in our housing. And for me, we can spend money on commercial hotels and not worry about it as a council. But when it comes to investing in residents, we're not.
Councillor, the question, I know the various options, but for the purpose, for our deliberation, to take your responsibility into account, do you feel that it represents value for money, your decisions?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Masters.
I'm quite notorious for being very fact-driven. I need to look at the evidence. I'm a pragmatist. So it still comes back to the fact that, having done all the maths based upon your own figures, we've got at least 784 people who don't have needs of this 1,400 people. We have either paying 58 million to not have 216 units of temporary accommodation for 3 years, and the impact of the building and the impact on the carbon footprint over that time, and 1,400 homeless versus spending 7 million and getting support now. We have a housing crisis that is escalating now. We don't know where we're going to be in 3 years. We might well have a different government. Hopefully things will be better, but we do know where we are now, and we don't have the money, and we need those sort of units of accommodation. I just think, to me, this is the definition of craziness.
What I would also say to you, currently, with the acquisitions programme, what are we purchasing currently? We are purchasing more and more family accommodation because that is where the need is currently.
On the scale that we're delivering.
And also, like I said to you, I think, when you're on about single accommodation, and it's the pathways that we put people in and making sure that we're delivering on those pathways and supporting those residents.
Vicky.
The point about the 3-year build period is noted, but it is important that we try and put our residents into good quality accommodation. I just wanted to make a
3 years' time.
We'll just make a small point about the total number of Newham residents that will be housed in the refurbished building compared to the total number of Newham homeless residents that will be housed in the current building. So yes, it's fewer units, but we are building family units. So if we assume on average 4 people per unit for the 122 units, that's 488 people housed. If we assume that for the current units, 216, let's say roughly a bit more than 2/3 of those, 166 go to single people, and then another 50 go to a couple. We're housing 266 people. So the refurbished, the rebuilt, redeveloped option actually houses more people than we're able to house currently. More Newham residents.
Can I just
Newham residents.
Can I just say, for the avoidance of doubt, we're not talking about families here, right? We're talking about housing single person households, right? Okay, that was my contention. That is the view. We're not talking about families. We actually agree that Victoria Street is not appropriate for
No,
families.
I'm not talking about families either. I'm talking about I'm talking about why the redevelopment option is worth pursuing. If
We're not talking about the redevelopment.
sentence. Hang on. No,
You're talking over each other, please.
please may I,
Through the chair, please, so I can,
may I be allowed to complete the point?
yes.
Thank you. We're here to answer, to explain to you why we think that the option to redevelop Victoria Street is the correct option. And we are redeveloping it for the purposes of family housing. So I'm pointing out that should we pursue the redevelopment option, we will end up housing more homeless Newham residents, a mix of adults and children, than we are able to house under the current option, because we'll be creating family homes.
Can I come in, Chair?
Yes.
Councillor Mohammed, you heard that from your officer, what was just said. Our contention has been from the very start, in this, using your own documents, but this temporary accommodation crisis in cost and scale is traumatic for the residents of Newham. And we are concerned that you and your officers are removing from your youth 216 units, which will be taken away from our supply and will be unable to be given to those single people, right? In answer to my colleague, you said it does represent value for money. Have you rerun the numbers? So since you produced this, and this is part 2 from going off from 2022, the financial situation is quite bad in this borough at the moment. The figures are not great. Council staff are potentially being told to consider redundancies. This proposal will not only take away 216 units, it will spend £56 million of council money to rebuild this new building. And at the end, using your officer's words, we get these wonderful family homes, and they might be brilliant. And Passive House is a good standard. But you're still spending £56.5 million, right? The interest alone is £3 million. In the budget book this year, it says our debt interest is going up by 8. I see your section 1 for checking. I think the figure is 8 million. £8 million of debt interest this year. That is money taken away from services. Just this project alone would take £3 million away and give it to the banks. It won't be given to our children. And I just want to get it on the record now. We are concerned, but you're taking away 216 units from your youth now. Our crisis is now. And you talk about 3 years' time. In terms of financial budgeting, you are unable to do a medium-term financial plan. You're doing a recovery budget. Even your own corporate self is producing 1-year budgets. You're not planning for the future, but you're asking us to believe you, but you're planning for the future. Paradox in that.
Conrad, do you want to come in on that?
I know there was a part of that was financial on. If it's helpful, Chair, I was also just going to suggest it might be helpful to get clarification on what seems to me is a key point, that there seems to be some sort of debate or lack of a common understanding in the room. Just on the financial point that Councillor Paul made, in terms of interest payments, it's important to emphasise that on the preferred option here, as is normal in schemes like this, the interest payments associated with borrowing wouldn't be an immediate charge to the council's bottom line. The whole point about the NPV, the net present value calculation, is that it takes all the interest payments associated with the construction period and compares them over time to the rents and so on, and indeed savings on other forms of temporary accommodation associated with the option. So I just wanted to clarify that point. This point there is not something that affects the council's budget immediately, and therefore it's a choice between that and some other service, because I think it's important to emphasise that. The point I was going to ask for, Chair, not exactly my field, but it does seem to be listening to the debate here. Councillor Masters suggested that of the 1,408, I think it is, singles and couples in temporary accommodation, that she'd done a calculation that showed a significant number of those were working, and hence this option about being able to live in Victoria Street because they would not have substantial needs. I think it would be really important to hear from well, myself, I don't quite understand where that figure's come from, but that's neither here nor there. But I think it seems to me that there is a lack of understanding as to whether that cohort of, whether some of them, other than the fact they can't afford private sector rents, have no other needs, or whether they all have significant other needs, such as would make the proposal placing more of them into Victoria Street problematic. And I think it would be really helpful to hear from the housing director on that point, just to clarify that, because certainly, as I say, it's not exactly my field, but hearing the debate, it feels as though there's two very different understandings in the room on that point.
And thank you. And that lack of understanding, indeed, there's a lack of understanding, but that lack of understanding is coming from witnesses. Is the witnesses are there to defend their decision. We're here to consider whether we think it's a wise decision or not. And that question was put in various ways to you, Councillor Mohammed, and you haven't provided us with any clarity. So you're leaving us in ignorance. And therefore, we can only consume that this hasn't been well thought out. You can challenge me on that if you want to. I'm inviting you to do so.
Well, like I said to you, we need more family accommodation. And again, when it comes down to single accommodation, we got, again, it's the pathways and those pathways.
Can I give you a solution then? I want to build more family homes, right? As someone who grew up in a council house in Newham, absolutely, right? So why don't you just spend 7 million quid or thereabouts, do it up and use it, and take the 50 odd and go and build family homes? How do you do that? You get what you want, we get what we want. Why don't you do that? Retain and use the building, right? That takes...
Councillor Paul, currently, we have a building which, again, is untenable for families. We've had... but what I'm trying to say to you, when we've put families in there, we've had singles in, we've had couples, we've had management issues. Like, this is hence why we want to make sure that we're making the right decision. And again, it boils down to the fact that we want to make sure that we're delivering for our residents and family homes.
This is like Councillor Mohammed, this is like two men arguing over the phone, right? We agree it's not appropriate for families. Can the record write that down? We agree. So let's call it 57 million, round it up, right? Using your own cabinet papers. Hopefully your office can develop a solution whilst we're talking, right? So you've got £7 million to do the building up, take the 50 and go and you put it in the acquisition programme and build some more homes. It's a win-win. Now, obviously, your officers are developing a solution. Maybe they'll take up my solution.
I can feel a recommendation coming up here. And can I say, that's a brilliant potential recommendation, Councillor Paul, because we retain the property, as Councillor Paul is saying. We have a lot of land. We are about, in fact, I don't know exactly what bit we're going to be selling off to make up the 16 million to plug the budget gap. But some of those land that we might be selling off our property or whatever, we can earmark to build, use the 57 million Councillor Paul just mentioned, to get your family homes, and we also keep that, and we then don't knock that. Brilliant recommendation.
And what we could do, is get some more affordable and then popular home units.
I give you time to consider that, because I can see the brains working. Councillor Lesserson.
Yeah, I'm looking at our key items in 5.6 and the final section here, finance view on the net present value of our marginal. I've got a couple of questions. The first question, obviously, done this financial appraisal. Do you consider the rents to be affordable on this scheme?
Are going to be LHA
Do
rents.
you consider them to be affordable?
They are going to be affordable, yeah.
Are they to be affordable?
Darren, can you come in on that, please?
Yeah, the modelling would assume that they're at LHA levels, yeah. So the families that would be placed there would, as we are with the properties that are being purchased through the acquisition programme being let at LHA rates, the families would be subject to a suitability and affordability test, that we'd only place people there that could afford to live there.
Right, I know that at the present moment that the net present value of it is marginal. You're putting an assumption that rent increase more than management and maintenance costs within this model. I think that's correct, isn't it? I think there's a 1% differential.
We'll just get the precise figure double check for you, councillor.
Right, okay, but if you bear with me, if you've got a differential inflation rate of 1%, broadly, at the present moment, rents represent roughly 28% of the median salary in Newham. By the end of the scheme, rent will represent 51% of the median income of someone in Newham, under the assumptions in that model. Councillor Chavan, you consider rent at 50% of median income? This is your model, not my model. In an Excel sheet, do you consider rents of 50% of median incomes in Newham to be affordable? Either a yes or a no. I would say no.
But you have to give the councillor a chance to answer.
Let me have a look.
Would it be possible for me to ask, sorry, Chair, would it be possible for me to ask councillor Hudson if I can just reframe the question to make sure that we've understood it correctly? Would that be?
Yes, that is in order.
So what you're, may I reframe it and see if I've understood what you're asking correctly, please? So what you're saying is that our model so we're currently proposing to let the properties at LHA rates. LHA rates, as I'm sure you're aware, is the rate that means that it can be fully covered by housing benefit in the event that the tenants are claiming benefit, and therefore that ensures that the tenants on benefit don't go into arrears. That's what LHA rate is, and LHA rates are the rates that were recently slightly uplifted by the government, but are pegged according to a proportion of the rate in the overall housing market. So they're pegged around the lower end of the normal commercial housing market. And you are then saying that we, in a modelling exercise, have said that we assume that rents will go up by a rate above inflation, CPI +1 over a period, and that will mean that over time they are likely to become a high proportion of the our residents' salaries. That's what you're saying, and you're asking whether that is whether that assumption is correct in our model. Have you understood our model correctly? And therefore, if that is correct, is that acceptable?
No, it's not. It's a financial model. So therefore, it's assumptions, okay? But my follow-up question is that if you vary your inflation rate on rents, that it matches wages and salaries, your NPV will be largely negative, because the only way you've got this to stack up is through differential inflation rates, which deflate the real rate of interest. Sorry to be technical, people.
Conrad.
This point about proportion of salaries in a year's time, I think, Vicky's explained in any event how the relationship between LHA works. But I think the point to bear in mind, and the reason that, I don't think that analysis works so that in 50 years' time, people will be paying more than half their salaries in rent. That's the model for the whole social housing sector. All of that is predicated on CPI +1% being the standard increase in rents. That's been government policy for a number of years, with years with no exceptions to it, and so on. So, if that point stacks up, it's sort of slightly irrelevant to the Victoria Street question because it applies to the entire social housing sector for the entire country. So I'm not really sure that that's the right way to think about it. In terms of the financial model and the net present value calculations, we emphasised in the report, and it's completely normal with these things. Of course, they depend on your assumptions, and your assumptions over 50 years, as everyone knows and understands perfectly well. The real world may turn out to be different than that. The report is very clear that although the financial model, externally validated, returns a positive net present value, it's also clear that that is, of course, marginal, 2.6 million over 50 years, and describes it in the report. The NPV is marginal. This means that there is very little margin for financial safety. In other words, if some of those assumptions in the real world turns out differently, then the project would either go negative, or indeed it could go the other way. But let's not plan for that. To become more positive. So I think we've got the information there that says why it is reasonable to believe that marginally this will return a positive net present value over time, and that depends on the assumptions that have been made that are reasonable, they're normal for the social housing sector. That doesn't mean that the world will turn out like that over 50 years. But I mean, the appraisal stacks up in that.
I'm sure the appraisal mathematically stacks up. The point that I'm making is that you've got incredibly liberal assumptions. So if you had more prudent assumptions, I would assume that your NPV will be negative.
I don't accept that the assumptions in there are financially liberal. I mean, CPI plus 1% is standard for the social housing sector. I mean, that's government policy. That's what we use for the housing revenue account. That's what's used right across the social housing sector. So that that would be the standard rental assumption to plug into anything like this. But as I say, the world may turn out to be different over the next 50 years. It certainly will be. But in terms of a model, I don't think there's a case for saying that that's a liberal assumption, or indeed an overly prudent one. It's just the obvious, sensible one to use. And the key point is that the report that was before Cabinet, and is before you now, it's very, very clear that this, isn't sort of returning some staggeringly high net present value that suggests you've got loads of margin for safety. It is only marginally positive, and the report's really clear about that. So,
can you round up, please?
Since you've got the information to make that decision, I don't think you need to revise the financial model for that.
Councillor Power, then Booker.
I'll give way to Booker first.
Thank you. Because now both myself and Councillor Paul have suggested the idea of investing 50 million somewhere else to create the housing that you want, and still using that space in order to produce some revenue as well. And because this space is in order for us to hear reasons why those things are not possible, so that we can say, oh, okay, that's why you're not doing it. That's why could you give us that information? Why is that not what you were doing?
If I may, can I just clarify? This space is for you to ask a range of questions relating to a decision made at Cabinet on the recommendations in a Cabinet paper on which we made a decision. And anything that comes out of this meeting as shaped in any recommendations that you decide to make will be considered by Cabinet at its meeting to consider any call-in recommendation. And in relation to the specifics of what you've raised in the context of one, housing need in the borough, the characteristics of those that present as homelessness, our duty to house regime that we have to adhere to, including an assessment of need. Those are areas that we would be happy to consider, and I'm sure that we would want to have discussions with officers around the proposition that you're suggesting and why you know, what are the challenges and what you're suggesting with regards to this specific
Sorry, I think it's actually because it was mentioned that that had been thought about before the paper had been made. So when the discussion was happening right at the beginning, that had been considered in the, when I said, the back office conversation, that had been considered. And then that didn't go into the paper because of presumably some decision that was made to say that it wasn't viable. So I'm asking, what was the reason that that wasn't viable? If it was a decision that had been made, it just didn't get into the paper.
Because it was always acknowledged that Victoria Street as a site would be suitable for our TA response and part of a series of approaches to address our TA response.
Okay, that's
And
so that because we always wanted to only do that as TA.
And in the context of what was emerging at the time and being developed, i.e. the Stratford vision, a broader view wanting to be taken about what type of neighbourhood do we want to enable in Stratford, because we don't just look at a site in isolation, we look at what else we're doing, what else is coming up, how do we ensure conformity to requirements either in planning policy around mixed neighbourhoods, etc., etc. So there would have been a range of issues.
It's useful context for us to think about recommendations. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Foran.
Just for clarity, Councillor Hamid, can you just tell us what the TA overspend is, the latest figure you know? What's the latest overspend on temporary accommodation?
Aaron, what's the latest overspend currently?
Hayley, if you've got the most recent number for the, so I think the last reported was 3.3 million was the last reported overspend.
3.3. 3.3 million can overspend. Okay. Overview over the past year has had the Newham for Finance come to us and say that temporary accommodation is the thing which could topple over the council's finances. Your own officers from housing have come here, said the underutilisation, the underuse of Victoria Street for single people is creating a negative position in the budget. Right? You agree with that, don't you? In July, an officer from your team came here. If you go to the video, approximately 35 minutes in, the officer confirms that. But my point I want to make, I just want to clarify, there are 216 units, which could be done up a bit, make them look better. And you're proposing to knock them down. Right? You want to take away those 216 units from your housing supply. But in the council paper, in the budget and your own papers, you say you haven't got enough TA property. Approximately 40% of your people that come to your service are single. But you are willing to demolish those 216 and create a situation where your TA overspend is increasing. Now, your finance accountant is sitting behind you. She can confirm to you the figure which you've put in the report. You've had to allow for that. In this paper, you've actually had to allow for the lack of income and the overspend which it creates. Again, I repeat your question. It was said to you, does this project in its current form represent value for money for the residents and council taxpayers of Newham?
What I will say to you again, for me, it's about good quality homes, and it's provided. I think that our need is more family homes.
Right. So you don't want to, just for clarity, you don't want to have single people. Is that what you're
saying? I'm not saying that. Right. What I'm trying to say to you, we're working on different pathways for single people. But I need in this borough more family homes.
Can you just think about it? There are residents watching tonight who know people, who are walked by people who are homeless. And they are listening to a Labour cabinet member wanting to demolish 116 units, which could be used to house those people, right? Today. Our housing crisis is today. And the reason why I say that, and I back it up, your own budget as an administration is for 1 year. There's no point talking to me or any of us about 3 years because you haven't done a medium-term financial plan. So yourself, you're not talking about the longer term, you're talking about the next year. So I want to talk about the next year. So within the next year, you could house 216 people in that building. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. That decision alone will save us the interest payment for the loan. Is that correct? I'm not, Councillor Mohammed? I'm asking you, Councillor Mohammed. Councillor Mohammed, I'll come to you in a minute, Conrad. I'm asking Councillor Mohammed. That decision
Right.
you might want to tell us what was.
No, it doesn't have to tell you what the conversation that was had.
All right, I'll conclude.
That's the question you put.
I will conclude, right? You are happy.
Councillor Paul, can you just repeat your question?
I will. So I will say again for clarity. You're happy, and I'll make the point in one at a time. You're happy to demolish 216 units, which could be used for single households, and in that decision, increase the debt burden for this council, which would take financial revenue away from providing core services. And by that decision, it will increase the TA overspend. Is that correct?
Councillor Paul, what I would say to you at the end of the day, it's a building with 219, which is going to hold 219 people. But would you really want a building, 219 people in there with, again, you're looking at management of that building, and it all depends who you're going to be putting into that building. And again, the problems with Victoria Street have been around complex need and the management of those.
I'll pretty happily answer that question. As a son of Newham, right, someone who's born here, I'll be quite happy to live with 219 of my fellow residents, right? I don't put down on them, right? And you're making an assumption, and I'll say it again, please do not beat down on our residents. Can we please stop saying putting all those people together creates problems? We have approximately 80 tower blocks in Newham, right? Where over 200 residents live together. Are you saying they are social problems? We're not saying that, but you continually say this, and I will continually challenge. Are you saying for those residents who live in tower blocks, they are problem residents?
I've seen Conrad and the mayor. Who's going to give way?
The mayor. My point's narrow financial.
Okay. At no point have I heard Councillor Shaban Mohammed talk in the language of social problems. At no point have I heard Councillor Shaban Mohammed talk in condemning ways about people that are presenting to the council because they are in need of help. That is something that may wish to be drawn on the responses that you are getting. It may be inferences that are wanting to be made and set across publicly. But this is an administration that has consistently and persistently talked in the language of compassion and care, has sought advice of housing experts and those experts that talk about the requirements of people with vulnerabilities that do present to us as homeless and for whom we have a duty of care, and we want to approach those residents sensitively. And we also recognise that we have a housing crisis facing so many households, be they single, be they couple, be they family, living in the private rented sector, coming to the council for help. There's a regime in place in terms of the criteria and the assessments that we've got to apply. And there is a desire and appetite and ambition to build homes, to sort out the temporary accommodation crisis. It's the reason why we campaign to government. It's the reason why we take, yes, challenging decisions relating to how do we ensure the viable supply of sustainable homes, particularly when it comes to buildings that have got short lifespans. And in the context of the temporary accommodation pressures that we are facing, we are also looking at a range of mitigations around allocation policy, that are all set out the draft budget proposals for the coming financial year. And we have also stated that we will be working on a set of financial plans that will cover an MTFS period, because we also need to work in the context of stability and certainty, despite the uncertainty that local government faces, because national government has not been setting or given us money over a beyond 1 year timeframe. And through the chair, I think there are some financial points based on some of the commentary made that it would be worthwhile colleagues to hear.
I would bring Conrad in. Can I just say, and I'm glad that you seek to clarify the point, because from where I'm sitting, I listen to Councillor Mohammed, and that is why I asked the question earlier. It gives the impression that the singles have some kind of need in all of them, and that is why my colleagues actually give the percentages, because that's why I asked the question, how many of them are presenting as having needs? And so what we need to do is to be careful how we refer to our residents, because they may be forgiven for going away with the impression that they all have some needs of some sort, and that's why they need, etc. One thing I want to say quickly, because we have about 5 minutes to round up this section. The TA budget for next year is going to be increased by 16 million because of the pressures coming through. Am I correct in that? Yes or no?
It's our best going estimate.
Yes, about 60 million. So that is very hard, but they're going to be for the TA pressures. In 2018, when the mayor made a decision, she made a decision to decant families. And I don't think anyone at the scrutiny benches would say that's a wrong decision to decant families. It wasn't to pull the building down and rebuild, it was to decant families from it. And I support that fully. Councillor Point and Councillor Booker is alluding to that also. And I think it's a brilliant idea. I don't know why I don't think about it myself. Keep the towards the 16 units, and then take the 57 million or whatever there is. We have a lot of land around Newham that we own, and start building the family homes that we need. And it's a win-win. So we still bought 57, but we provided additional homes. And another thing too, and this might be my last bit on it, we have a track record sometimes of overspending. And given the carpenters and given the popular overspend of recent months, this 57 might end up in the 60s in terms of 62, 65 million, thereabouts, I'm just guessing now, but give me some latitude to guess, given our overspending record.
You made it very clear in the report.
Yeah. So they've
some things you haven't done the preliminary to then prove the price. So yes, it's about
our budget gap. Conrad.
I think most of my points have been made. I mean, to the question you asked then, yes, the report makes it very clear that this is a preliminary estimate of cost. And for the avoidance of doubt, the cabinet recommendation was to continue with the third option, taking that to stage REBA 3, that's the sort of technical term for sort of more complete designs and so on, in order at that point you would then have a fully designed up project for which you could let construction contracts and so on. So you're quite right, Chair, the estimate of 50 odd million, whatever we have in there at the moment, a reasonable, sensible, credible estimate. But once you design the scheme up, you know, that estimate will change. That's normal and is made clear in the report. The only other thing I wanted to highlight, clearly, if the decision proceeded as set out in Cabinet, you would then subsequently let a construction contract. The date given in the Cabinet report, the earliest is January 25. So just to the point that was made about sort of when the expenditure would be incurred and so on, you know, your costs of that would fall wholly or at least very largely in 25-26 rather than 24-25. That's a material factor for consideration. And the other point again, just to emphasise, is normal on these schemes in terms of the interest cost of that, you know, whenever that is incurred. You know, it's not a choice between paying that interest and cutting other services, because you sort of bundle up all the interest costs into the scheme and over time meet it from the income derived from the scheme. So I just, you know, for the avoidance of doubt on that point, because I think it has been said in passing once or twice in this meeting, you know, in terms of the interest costs on that, it's not that would necessarily lead to cutting an equivalent amount of services. I just think it's really important to emphasise that point.
Thank you, Conrad.
So this particular scheme isn't expected to make any money though, is it?
So it's expected to recover its costs, including interest, but not to provide any sort of meaningful surplus. Yeah.
Yep.
But if it was a negative NPV, then actually it would be true that there would be some cuts needed.
Okay. So this is, are we going to be rounding up now? Councillor Poor, then Councillor Masters will be the last person, unless there's a supplementary. So that's it. And then I bring this to an end.
A quick question to Vicky Clark and Conrad Hall, based on Councillor Booker's excellent suggestion. If we were to take £50 million of capital and give it to inclusive economy and finance, could we reprofile that in our existing programmes so it could have a positive impact for our budget? I'm asking technically, if we give you 50 million, Vicky, could you get?
It certainly.
You can get more.
Well, can I answer? You asked whether it could always be applied to another project, and if it were applied to another project, then the overall total of money that we borrowed would be less by that much money if we weren't doing this, of course.
Okay.
Now, and yes, there are housing schemes that we principally now through Popular Homes that we will be seeking to bring popular living, sorry, get my terminology correct. There are schemes that we will be seeking to bring forward, which will require money to be spent. So of course, it could be spent, this money could be spent elsewhere.
And I'm glad you mentioned Popular, because the audit committee had serious concerns over governance procedures on Popular. So although I welcome the use of the money, I think there are concerns we raised on audit on the use of the money. Question to Conrad: if we were to I use the word reprofile in its widest form, could that have a positive impact in the final budget coming forward?
I don't think it's germane to 2024-25, because if the decision proceeded as set out to Cabinet, you know, a construction contract will be let at the earliest in January 25, and therefore it's unlikely that you would incur any significant expense at all, certainly not anything like the bulk of it, till the 25-26 financial year. So on the sort of very narrow point about would this, would not doing that and having that 50 million elsewhere have any impact on next year's budget, the answer is, I'm sure there'll be some at the margins, but essentially not. This is all about what you think the right long-term strategy is.
Okay, thank you.
Standing order? I move an extension of standing order.
Agreed.
Councillor Masters.
I think, if I'm going to be the last person to speak on this, this comes down to really simple things. If these units are unsuitable for people who do have additional vulnerabilities, and let's just remember, when the £7 million option was tabled, it included 0.9 million in terms of sort of wraparound care. So that particular issue would be addressed. It still leaves units that the other 784 people we've identified who'd go into, freeing up other homes that you think would be more suitable for the people who would benefit from smaller premises. I finish by sort of stating the figures again. 58 million versus 7 million. 1,400 homeless households that do not include children, and the loss of 216 units for 3 years at a point when the housing crisis is at its peak. We don't know where we're going to be with the housing crisis in 3 years. We do know where we're going to be now and at least the next year or two. So to me, it's just those figures just make this unacceptable. And I'm amazed that this session's gone on as long as it has.
Thank you. We understood always been that we are a valued partner within this council. And I would like to believe that. Good governance and political leadership means that sometimes when scrutiny speaks and give advice by way of recommendations, we carefully consider them. And I think this is a perfect way to pause and carefully consider this and come back hopefully with a favorable response. What I'm going to do at this stage is go into the next session where the scrutiny would go into committee. With that, I would have to ask the witnesses to leave. We'll go into committees and consider the way forward. Yes.
Chair, please may I ask a question? I think we would be very interested to understand the proposals or recommendations. But I think I'm hearing two slightly different recommendations here.
We haven't recommended yet because
or two different ideas, and I'm just asking.
Don't worry, I think that we'll, in our own committee.
Any feedback? One seems to be more about PRS and one seems to be more about retaining the use for single people whom we have a duty to house through TA. So it would be helpful to understand.
Okay.
Can we just
we understand what Vicky's asking? So we're Mayor.
And just wanted to thank committee through you, Chair, for this evening's session, but also just to provide you a reassurance, subject to whatever the outcome of your deliberations are and whatever we've within that and considering the meeting of cabinet, and you'll be provided with our response at that meeting.
Yeah, thank you. But just before you go, I just need to speak with Michael. Room in the next room to await the outcome of our deliberation, or you can leave and Michael would communicate back to the normal channel.
If I may, just in the interests of enabling officers to go home and for their well-being, can I request that we're able to leave and we just follow the process as is ordinarily pursued, i.e. we will receive your
to the normal channel
determination through the normal channels. Yeah. So I'm assuming that we'll receive them tomorrow.
And just 1 minute.
Way out the door.
Spiritually already in.
Okay, so
Are we still live? It says live,
so
not actually.
there's only one flaw in what I said, and I just confirm with Michael. It's okay, but just in case we need any clarification, and I'm just thinking, as we deliberating, if we need, you, Councillor Mohammed, or you, Vicky, to just elaborate on something, and you go, we won't. So I am at a loss to this point, but I think we've heard everything. But yes.
I mean, I live locally. I'm happy to stay if that's helpful.
You don't have to stay. I'm just thinking maybe if you don't have to stay, but maybe if you leave a number with Michael, and if we need to reach out to you, then
I'll leave my number.
Well, chaps, I have your number.
Yeah, you've got mine.
Okay.
I mean, if it's a very technical housing question, your best person for a quick answer is Darren rather than me.
So maybe what we can do, Darren, is if you go in the waiting room and if we need to allot you. Yeah.
Just as an additional suggestion,
yes.
If there are any outstanding sort of technical questions or general questions, as you're considering and arriving at whatever conclusion or position we want to arrive at, given that we're unlikely to receive anything until close of business tomorrow, does that give enough time during the working day for those?
Well, we want me to be able to consider, because we have to come up with recommendations before we leave tonight. So we won't be able to do that. And that is why, to be helpful, I was suggesting that.
I'm more than happy to stay with Vicky, and then if there are technical questions, I'm sure we'll be able to provide an answer to it.
I think it's
Could you give an estimate? Is it like half or 2 hours or 10 minutes?
Yes.
It's beyond 9:30.
Okay.
In the next room, and we.
Yes, that's perfect. Yeah.
Okay, we'll wait.
Yeah, just to clarify, this meeting must conclude at 9:30.
Thank you. Yes.
Door.
Okay. I tried to let you go, but
Thank you.
Are we still live? All right.
thank you. Back to.
This is the representative. The monitoring officer's representative.
Okay.
But it's your discretion, Chair.
Actually, maybe.
And so I think you'd have to give that direction.
Okay. I was asking, Michael, we have the legal representative here from the council. I'm representing Satish. So are we comfortable for him to stay or to join?
Yeah.
Okay, right?
Help me next and get.
Okay, right. Thank you. Now we go into committee stage. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, now, okay, so at this stage, we would deliberate on everything that we heard and come up with a recommendation. So the first question I have to put to you before we go in, based on what we've heard, do you believe we should uphold the calling?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, right. So now, since that you've agreed that we uphold the calling, we now need to move in to the recommendation phase as to why and the recommendations we're going to make. Yes.
Actually, also just say that Paul has his hand up and he hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah.
Just say that what Vicky was saying about the clarification, we do just need to make sure that we know what we're talking about. The 47% that we were talking about, whether it is exactly 47% or not, Newham currently does not house, therefore it doesn't cost us anything. They present and we say, sorry, no, you're not eligible to be housed. So that's why she was saying there's a difference between the suggestion of putting 7 million into that property in order to make it suitable for, say, artists or students or something like that, so that it can provide a revenue, and using the other 50 million to build the housing, because we think it costs about 50 million to build the housing anyway. So that's the one suggestion that she was saying. But if we were talking about our housing duty, that would always be people with high needs.
Yeah.
So that's why they were saying they don't believe that that's a suitable use of that space because it would be people with high needs.
Yeah.
So that's the slight difference between the two options.
Just to build on that point, and Susan made the point, they didn't consider in December 2022, option 4 is the one about retain and reuse. That wasn't considered in full. It seemed to be,
It would be conditional care.
they went straight to demolition and refurb,
Yeah.
right? And also, I think we are not the cabinet. It is not for us to tell them how, it's for them to make the choice, right? So for us, let's go back to core principles. We feel it's wrong for them to demolish the building.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
What that does give them, what do they do with the building? Well, they can go back a year ago and look at option 4 and just tart it up a bit. And if there's additional needs, they put it in. The building improved. For the 50 odd million pounds they haven't used, right? It is for them to discharge that capital. If they want, like we all want more family homes, it's for them to get the best option to spend the 50 million pound. We shouldn't be saying whether it's PRS or this or Popular or whatever. However, the only caveat, if it went to Popular, based on the audit committee meeting, I would have grave reservations of giving them any more money.
Chair, I'm going to jump in if I can.
Yeah. Okay, let's bring it forward.
Okay, so just listening completely to what was being said, I think I didn't need to intervene because everybody was so on point. So from where I sit, it looks like an ill-conceived idea without the level of depth and breadth of thinking about an alternative. I loved the idea of spending 7 million to refurb and 50 million to rebuild. That seems as pragmatic as we can get because it then meets the local needs. And I think in terms of the data that you were teasing out with regards to the 47% who don't have needs, I was absolutely thinking the same thing about, it's a misnomer to say that every single person has high need. And I think that the answer that the needs can't be met is also not really thinking pragmatically enough. So just in terms of very pragmatic approach for me, the value for money question, I can't agree with. I don't think it's value for money. I was quite surprised when Terry, you asked a question and the answer came back quite, vociferously. Yes, it's good value for money.
Yeah.
I don't think it's good value for money at all. I think that there's a bit of a dereliction of meeting the needs of local young people who are more likely to be homeless. And I'm very concerned about us not meeting that obligation with this strategy. I don't think there's been enough thinking about a forward plan. What I'm not really clear about is the condition of the building. So is the building at demolition stage or not?
No,
If
it's not.
Right, then the business case for demolition doesn't stack up really. So it's at refurbishment stage, which is 7 million. If that, I don't know, 7 million seems like a pretty good figure. So I think equally the council hasn't considered the additional support structures that are in place to meet those complex needs, which sit in public health, which sit in the voluntary and community sector, and therefore to say that they can't meet the needs of those with complex needs, or it would cost too much money, again, doesn't stack up to scrutiny.
Absolutely.
But that was in the original bid that they allowed 0.9 million pounds within that option to cater for that wraparound care that wasn't there before. And I wasn't specifying a cohort. There are all kinds of cohorts that you might want to use that building for, or alternatively, use it for different needs, which will free up property elsewhere that you can then use to have smaller groups of people. But you're talking about all different cohorts. I mean, when they were talking about care leavers, their support needs will be very different to people who've got substance abuse needs, for example. So I just, I'm just stunned by.
Just to make the point, Paul, building on what you just said, I'm putting it to something which Susan said, and Susan alluded to. The peer review, which had just been done, said Newham's temporary accommodation response was inadequate because it didn't have a whole it wasn't owned by the whole organisation. right? Now, if you put what Paul just said and Susan just said, what we're talking about is housing, working with adults, working with public health, to have a much wider holistic solution which meets the needs of young people. Oh, so actually the solution we talked about was issued, I suspect the peer review actually said. We didn't have a whole corporate response. And I think for me, that was a big, you know, we weren't really here to look at the peer review, right? Because we've had some brief headlines, but the peer review is clear on saying there's an insufficient corporate response on looking at TA and its sense. And I think what Paul said just there, what Susan said in her, made the point really well. And I think I was quite surprised those points hadn't been made.
So we need to start looking at the recommendations. So we know that it's flawed. We know that the first of the questions, the mayor decided to decant, and at some point, decanting become pulling down and refurbish, and they didn't think of the other bit. So it's clear. And obviously, Councillor Mohammed is thinking around the entire thing. It's flawed, I believe. I think it's flawed and not well thought out, and that's why I said, and I hope, if Scrutiny is a valued partner, they will start thinking of the options to keep that and then use that money to provide additional. So they're not losing that 216, and they're getting how many more?
I think Terry's point of that, so we could start the recommendation with, given the financial situation that we find ourselves in currently, and start it off from that point. And so, just
because the lead is now.
It wasn't known at the point at which the decision was made.
Absolutely, we didn't know.
2022, we were in a very different position.
So we need the wording, yes.
Can I have a suggestion that actually that's a second, it's a crucial point, but it's secondary. The first point is we are committed to supporting residents into accommodation collectively, and we've got to restate that principle. And then comes the fact that the context at the moment demands that this decision be revisited.
You got that.
Yes, well, so yes,
Committee,
this is supporting residents into accommodation. The second clause.
The second point is Liz's on in the financial.
You haven't captured Rita Bittis yet. So Rita, can you just repeat? So Micah.
We are committed
to supporting residents.
We are committed to ensuring that the needs of residents in Newham are fully met, that the housing needs of residents in Newham is fully met.
Okay.
And then
I think we understand that this is an issue larger than we have the resources to currently fully provide, because that's the case, isn't it? The housing needs of
then you're opening up the debate again, aren't you?
But then we say, and bearing in mind that we're in this.
I think that's the point. But then it was what you said next, given the current financial context.
And we could put something in, it could be that the housing crisis is not of our making, but, that bit as well.
I know you came to this about the original 2022.
Come back to that.
Recommendations still hold.
So we had a draft text, Michael. Does the text still hold?
Yes, so the first part about this, and then the second, which is to rescind the cabinet decision, and then getting into specific recommendations.
Okay, so can you just take us through? So where are we? What have we actually got down on paper as a resolution from this meeting? Because we had a draft, right?
Yes.
So point one is?
So that the decision made by Cabinet on 5th December 2023 on Victoria Street option appraisal report, preferred option be referred to Cabinet for reconsideration at this point. The following recommendations have been made to Cabinet: that the decision made on Cabinet for December on Victoria Street options appraisal preferred option be rescinded and alternative options be considered instead, and the option to retain and reuse the Victoria Street site be considered to provide accommodation for homeless single people and couples including the identified investment and recladding and wraparound support.
That's where we have to make a decision on what we are saying, because actually saying to reuse it for homeless people, what we are then saying is that that they will come back and say that we actually thought about it, and even though we did put that forward as a option, the reason that we're not going for it is because we do not consider 200 and something individuals with high needs in one place a good idea, even with wraparound care.
What we could do is ask them to revisit option 4 from the cabinet paper in December 2022, which had a reuse option in it, right? It said, obviously they could have some provision in there, but as Paul said, there's already existing provision in the borough, like floating support or whatever. I still think we should just allude that option for in December, not 2022 paper, and get on with it.
And I also had, I'm not quite sure again of the configuration of the building, but if it's going through a refurb, then surely it can be reconfigured to meet multiple needs with minimal costs.
Yeah, because there's two things, because the refurb as defined in this paper is like a massive, singing and dancing, all bells, blah, blah, blah. When we mean retain and reuse, let's say, this is not the technical answer, a lick of paint sort of thing.
Well, it's removing the cladding.
And remove the
Remove
cladding to make it safe. And there might be some remedial, a lick of paint here and there, but basically it's in a usable form and it's not in a demolished state, Paul,
So can we?
That wouldn't be for homeless people, that would just be for general, or would it be?
No, for homeless people, because again, we can't say, but everybody, because if we say putting that number of people is a problem, quote unquote, what about the other 80 tower blocks?
No, because those towers.
Yeah. One of the arguments.
That's it.
Can't manage that I need.
Oh, make it mixed use.
Yeah, that would be much better. That would be it.
So.
Guys,
We
have got the wraparound care.
Right.
So can I? Okay, so when, as Terry alluded to option 4 of the December 2022 report that talks about retaining it and using it. So can we take some of those wording or some of those for our recommendation?
You could actually almost take, I think you're concurring that option that's in the cabinet report. So with a few tweaks, you actually could endorse that word and then put it in your recommendations to cabinet.
Yeah, happy.
And I think if one of the barriers was that actually, I think we need to address the argument that comes back about the management.
Make it mixed use.
Make it mixed use.
Normal community, mixed communities.
That's what, and also if that's what the Stratford Master Plan says.
Absolutely right.
So that's the key thing that needs to be added to it, Michael, that we're not suggesting that it's then used for 100% for the homeless people that are coming, that we have a duty of care for, the duty to house. We're having it as mixed use. So there would be a proportion would be retained for the homeless population with the wraparound care that would be appropriate there. But the rest could be used in whatever way was appropriate and could even produce revenue.
Yeah, is that right? We've got enough.
Yeah. So basically what we're saying is that a proportion of it will be given over to people for revenue generation, people who are working.
I mean, let's just say mixed use.
Yeah, I think mixed use is fine.
Let's not.
Mixed tenure.
Yeah, let's not be officers here, right? Let's just say retain and reuse, look at option 4 from December 22 paper, and also make it a mixed use development, which would be a mixed social tenure, is part of the fabric of Stratford, full stop, and let them give us a 300-page document on how they're going to achieve it.
And I would also like to see how we ensure that actual proper due consideration is given to our recommendation. It is too easy for cabinet to say, we thought about it, we didn't like it. I want to know what steps are taken to make sure that this is given proper consideration and some modelling and some work's done.
So would that result in a different options paper then, Rita? Because clearly the options that we've been given are presented as a fait accompli. They haven't fully explored the other options.
If they're going to say they're not going to do it, I want to know they've gone through the modelling that demonstrates
But they could just come back with the same modelling. I mean, I just feel that we should kind of sort of stop there because otherwise they'll hire another consultant to run the house and we'll be in the same place.
I'll do it. 3 million quid. I'll get my brother.
Yeah.
I think we've got a good solution.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah,
Well done.
I agree.
So can I just be clear? We're using the term mixed social tenure.
Yeah.
Do we want to go that far? Because
Yeah, no, we do, because otherwise they will say, they will say again, we can't do it because of all of the.
okay, but should it be potentially with mixed? Because I just worry that having made such a strong case in terms of providing homes for the homeless, if we're then watering that down, then
Okay, I have a solution there. Let's say, so we have made a solution to retain and reuse. There's approximately £7 million of capital, but they're old numbers.
yeah,
So that leaves approximately £50 million of capital, which could be deployed. Now, what we could say, going back to Liz's point about the financial context, it might be we don't use that £50 million now and we forego their interest, or we use that to buy more affordability in one of the developments, or we do.
Do we even need to say that?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that's the key thing, isn't it? Because we're just saying that actually we can then reuse the additional 50 in however we want.
yeah.
But sorry, can I go back to this point that Susan just raised about mixed social tenure? My understanding of mixed social tenure is people who are on temporary accommodation, who are on local housing. I'm not.
Fine, yeah, that's
so I
right.
don't know if we need to have a footnote to explain what we mean.
No, we don't, because thinking about it, in my street, which is, you look at it, it's just houses, but there are mixed tenures. You don't know.
Yeah,
You can't tell by the door if you rented, you owned it, you shared ownership. No one used to know.
The only reason though to have a footnote is so that they don't then come back to us.
We
and
don't
say-
want private landlords. We
Okay.
don't want buy to let or something else creeping in.
Michael, if you've got enough to draft it, because you've got to come back by committee, by email tomorrow, right?
Okay,
So go and get them.
so and then we can include Rita bit. And I agree because they will just come back and say, no, so what you're saying, Rita, what steps have been taken to ensure that due consideration and modeling are taking place, have been given to overview and scrutiny recommendations? Yes.
So when they come in, what is it that we're saying? Sorry, when they come back in, what is it that we're saying?
When they come back in, all that we're going to say to them is that we have resolved.
Oh, we don't have to give them our.
Have to give them the reason.
Yeah.
They're going to get our.
Get the full text.
Okay, so go and get them.
Do they even need to come back in? Can't we?
No, they didn't come back in to possibly give them due respect and let them know.
I thought it was more respectful.
Just clear, so what about these points we addressed about statements we are committed?
Just stop them. Let me just stop them coming in. Let me just get something with Michael.
There was a statement made and open this. We are committed to ensuring that housing. Yes. And that given the financial situation that council is in and the in view of the urgent housing social needs.
Resolution though, Michael.
But that was mentioned.
This was just a
Actually leading into it.
This was just a preamble. So because
They only need the actual resolution.
so what Rich was saying is a preamble, given the current financial context, we committed to ensure that the social housing needs of our residents are met. And we are saying that the property should be retained for a mixed social tenure or tenants as part of the fabric of Stratford, etc. More or less, that's what we're saying. Then we go in to the recommendation, the draft, the tier and recommendation, and option 4 to tidy it up and then come back to you tomorrow to toss and throw it before we sign it off by tomorrow, end of business tomorrow.
Scrutiny chairs tomorrow lunchtime anyway, haven't we?
Yeah. So
Chair, can I just, if it's helpful, just to make an adjustment slightly to that proposal. If you are agreeing your resolutions with recommendations, obviously, as we discussed earlier, including the statements, if you are agreeing in principle to use the retain and reuse statement as part of your presentation, you can agree those points tonight. Because obviously this is the committee making its resolution.
But that's what we agree, yes.
Okay.
And all that we're going to be doing, the committee will give the chairs dedicated power to tidy this up. So basically, given what I've just said, it's going to come to you.
No, but.
One of us as chair. We tidy it up, and we're going to come back to the committee by email. You just say, yeah, and nay, that's what we all agree to, da, 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 da.
Sounds good.
We just be ideas, the wording, etc. So-
Just as verify the accuracy of what the committee is agreed.
That's right. So do we have to delegate the authority to
Agreed.
tidy this up?
Yeah.
And it will then come back to you
It's delegated.
to agree.
With the caveat, I want to stress again that we are committed first to that principle of doing the best by housing.
Yeah.
Second is the financial context, because we should be doing best by housing in whatever context we're in.
Committed to the principle. Yeah.
Chair, you might want to ask the
Legal point.
points of nuance here.
Yeah, I have some concerns. I think the ideal situation is there should be a draft, there should be a wording in which the committee should agree to have a resolution in which they can then put that to the vote, and in which then that can be submitted immediately to cabinet for reconsideration.
Does it have to be an in-person vote, or could it be an online vote? Like if we were in a Zoom meeting or a night?
It would have to be an in-person vote.
Do you want us to vote?
So my recommendation is agree on a wording to vote on the resolution.
Yeah.
And if whoever makes the representations from the Overview Scrutiny Committee to cabinet can make representations, but there needs to be a vote.
So we have to
Right.
actual wording.
The committee needs to make a resolution on wording of the resolution to be put to cabinet.
So
Decided.
Can I ask, is that the resolution, not necessarily the recommendation?
Well, it should be.
the vote, the same, the vote.
Would be the same?
There needs to be a decision needs to be read on whether to refer back to cabinet.
Yeah.
And then the resolution needs to set out the concerns.
Okay.
But the key thing, it needs to make a resolution to refer back to cabinet.
So Michael, are we saying Michael right now should draft on that computer?
Yeah.
And read out to us?
Yeah.
At the end, we go agree.
Yes, then you can vote on that resolution, yes.
Are you ready to do that?
We give you like 5 minutes piece to write it down.
Okay, give me 5 minutes.
So I'm going to base this on what we read out earlier in the initial resolution plus the point.
No, don't worry about telling us. You do the first draft and then we'll talk about it. So if you write the first draft and then we can edit it.
Excuse me, I shall be back.
I would hate this job, by the way. If I was you, Michael, I'd hate this.
Don't distract him.
like voting with that.
I move an extension of standing order. Okay, thank you.
Voted on.
Do you want me to email the committee as well at the same time?
I need to get the thing done and then you can email the committee afterwards, I'd say.
So you want me to read it out?
Yes, it's done. Yes, please.
It's the draft for your
Yeah.
consideration. Right, so I'll just read out verbatim, okay?
Yeah.
Want to make any amendments to those verbatim?
No, just.
Yeah.
Really one.
Okay, so it's to move that the decision made by Cabinet on 5th December 2020 Victoria Street for options appraisal report preferred option be referred to Cabinet for reconsideration. 2, that the following recommendations be made to Cabinet. 1, that the decision made by Cabinet on 5th December 2023 Victoria Street options appraisal report preferred option be rescinded and alternative options considered instead. 2, that the option to retain and reuse the Victoria Street site be considered to provide accommodation for homeless single people and couples, including the identified investment in re-cladding and wraparound support. 3, that the Cabinet notes the key concerns of the committee include the council's current financial situation, including the costs of temporary accommodation, as well as the current high level of social housing needs and homelessness in the borough. Believes that the current option agreed by the Cabinet provides less financial and social value for money. 4, that the retain and reuse options paragraph 4.29 of the report to Cabinet on Victoria Street options on 6th December 2022 be endorsed by the committee for inclusion in the report back to Cabinet to refer the executive decision for reconsideration.
Yeah. What we haven't done is in terms of the preamble to all that is that given the current financial context, also what we need to do is what steps have been taken, because we want to know if they rejected, what steps they've taken.
That mixed tenure.
And again, we didn't put in the bit about the mixed social tenure.
Right, there's 3, right.
That was fabric.
All right, that's 3 things. Number 1, put the financial context in. Just put the financial.
Did I actually put that though?
I thought
That was all in there.
you did, right?
That was already in.
2, the mixed tenure
Yes, the mixed social.
in there.
Yeah. So we'll have to put that.
So we put that in part 3 when it
Yes.
says the key concerns of the committee. So we're asking Cabinet to note key concerns which include current financial situation, costs including high costs of temporary accommodation, current high levels of social housing needs and homelessness, and then we include that the options to be considered should include mixed social tenure. In that section.
In the option. It was the reuse.
But that is the bit that says, I think it's the bit that says that the option to retain, reuse the Victoria Street site is considered. It would be better put in that bit.
In that bit, yeah.
Accommodate the homeless people, blah, blah, blah.
Do we need to make it clear that the reason why we're saying that is because of their point about the management issue?
Yeah, in fact, that's good.
Yeah.
But then that would eradicate the management issue.
Okay, then we have to give it to him to draft it then.
So understanding the management issue.
Yes.
With fully.
So in this bit here.
Full home.
The irony was they were judging the management situation at which they hadn't applied the management. And it worked, if you think about
Accommodation.
when it was still
Single.
and all those mothers wanted to stay
So that's.
with their baby.
I mean,
as mothers and
mixed tenure accommodation to include.
Certainly.
Is that right?
No,
What really struck me is they can
yeah.
and we picked it up fine to our.
Oh dear, okay.
Why is that?
This was the eradication they made for the. This, what you said again, it will eradicate the need for the.
Difficult to say things twice.
But basically, what you're saying is that we don't the management issue.
Having listened and understood the issues around managing the building with solely occupied by single homeless individuals, we would suggest a mixed tenure
Approach.
Single high needs
Yeah.
homeless individuals.
Yeah, we would suggest a mixed tenure approach.
That's what their inference was throughout, wasn't it?
So
It's a mixed housing.
Which means
Mixed tenure approach that would include social housing.
Mixed tenure, you're talking about freehold, leasehold, rented. What you're talking about
Yeah.
is housing allocation. Because it can get quite, I can see us going down the weed.
Yeah.
So it's like a mixed community.
But is the thing that you've said,
Top.
that actual word, go on.
So not sure what happened with the time that was, like technically.
yeah, but we standing order anyway.
Had you?
Yeah.
You've extended it. So
Right.
basically,
Last,
On,
no.
Mickey Clark's not sure. So can we just,
Well, it's a different provision because to.
what do we do?
Let's have-
Michael? What do we do?
You extended the meeting to 9:30.
Right.
Now, I think we've been talking about suspending the whole of standing orders now, which is a more drastic step. So that's.
What do we do, Michael? What, you've given us options. Tell us what
First,
to do.
first thing you have done is you've extended the meeting under Rule 11, right, which is the maximum usual time to 9:30.
Yeah.
And it was discussed, I wasn't clear that it was decided how you extend beyond that point, and the only way of doing that by precedent interpretation is to suspend all of standing orders under a different provision, right? And the legal officer.
Let's just
So
do
what
it.
do we do? Tell us
We
what
have
to do
done it.
then.
You should either finish the meeting on time.
we should make that.
So look,
We'll get.
come on, let's get on with it.
And I say, we should make a determination. The president has been set to the last call in
Yeah.
when we couldn't finish off the recommendations in the time allotted. So Satish,
Tony, the office,
It wasn't.
The easiest way to do it is.
yes,
Disapply standing orders for say 15 minutes.
yes, let's,
Purposes of homeless.
Yeah.
accommodation.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
If you want-
Second,
suppose that,
I understand, yeah, fine.
fine.
so what is the wording?
The wording is, the committee agreed to supply council procedure orders regarding duration and to extend the closing time of the committee meeting from 9:30 PM to 9:45 PM.
Agreed.
Agreed.
agreed. Thank you.
I've given you my voice and agreed.
Yeah, it's action rather than discussion we need, right?
you.
Thank you.
Michael, where are we now?
So basically, where we are, so we got here that the option to retain, reuse the Victoria's Street site be considered to provide mixed social tenure, okay? Now, the bit that Lisa says is important, so we have to weave it in somewhere there, which is saying, having listened and understood the management needs of high needs residents, we agreed to have a mix.
We recommend.
We recommend a mixed tenure approach.
That's right.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Having listened and understood the management needs of high needs residents, we recommend
A mixed tenure approach.
that, yeah. A mix.
You sure it's 10 years?
Yeah, it's a,
Can you say mixed tenure approach,
That's fine.
focusing on social, or like whatever the housing register thing is? Yeah, mixed social tenure,
tenure. Michael,
like it.
Michael,
Mixed social.
social tenure.
Big social tenure.
That's what we said.
Okay, having.
Yeah, so this bit going to happen instead, recommend that's the option. With that or bit there, but then go on top.
Pressure, but they want to set the buildings.
Okay. Okay, just a suggestion. I personally, I kind of feel that you just get a subclause here, so you make it clear that you're still endorsing the retain and reuse option.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
And the second point.
yeah,
Yes, agree with one or the other.
yeah.
Yeah.
You want to read it out and we can agree it so we can go home?
So is that all right? So we can
Okay,
put that
yeah.
person then put
Yeah,
that.
put it, yeah, you can read it out.
All right, see, thank you.
Michael needs to be happy, Tony.
Okay, I'm just going to cut
He's
to
happy.
the recommendations. That the decision made by Cabinet on 5th of December 2023 Victoria Street options proposal or preferred option recommended alternative options. Instead, two, option to retain and reuse the Victoria Street site be considered to provide mixed tenure, social tenure accommodation for homeless and single people and couples, including the identified in recladding and wraparound support. Three, that having listened and understood the management needs of high needs residents, we recommend a mixed social tenure approach.
Not the needs twice.
Yeah, get rid of. So,
And we changed the phrase mixed social tenure, Michael, wasn't that the whole point of what Terry just said?
No, mixed social tenure was the one that we wanted. We wanted the social in it.
Tenure.
So it's social tenure, not just mixed tenure.
Phrase just now, though.
No, because we use allocation, but we don't own.
Okay,
We're going down the weeds a bit. I think they know what
Okay,
we
fine.
want, but let's give them.
fine.
what do we mean by management needs?
Okay, what they were saying is that if you put I needs tenants who has social or health needs,
Yeah.
then the managing, okay, so they didn't say this, but let's suppose we put a lot of people there, and this is not what they said, but have drug issues or other social issues, it would be bad news to put in all of those people in one accommodation. That presents a management problem. Yes.
Support.
Support.
No, it was the needs that was the issue, I think.
Because it will present a management problem, and they didn't want to put all of those
Management.
in one block.
Management approach, does that fit, Mike?
Yeah, well, that'd be better.
Can you read it out again?
Yeah, okay, I'll put the word approach in.
I'm going to the toilet.
No, because we'll have to vote.
All
on it.
right, sorry.
That's the management requirement, not approach.
Requirement.
That's the be a management requirement or management,
Requirement actually is good because they told us that it was a requirement.
the management requirement. The support, okay. The support resident, yes. That might,
Residents with high need.
that might present with I needs or whatever, yeah. So to support residents that might present with I needs. Okay. We recommend. Okay, a mixed social tenure approach, right? So if you read that, and see if members agree.
Okay, so I'll just go to the option to retain and reuse the Victoria Street site be considered to provide mixed social tenure accommodation for homeless single people and couples, including the identified investments in recladding and wraparound support. Three, that having listened and understood the management requirements to support residents that might present with high needs, we recommend a mixed social tenure approach. We reiterate the word.
No, I think that sounded okay.
Yeah, the challenge in management requirements.
Let's keep going.
You're happy with that?
Yeah, I'll come back to that.
Four, the Cabinet notes the key concerns of the committee include the council's current financial situation, including the costs of temporary accommodation, as well as the high level of social housing needs and homelessness in the borough, and believes that the current option agreed by Cabinet provides less financial and social value for money.
Yeah, agreed.
Five, that the retain and reuse options paragraph 4.29 of the report to Cabinet on Victoria Street options on 6th December 2022 be endorsed by the committee for inclusion in the report back to Cabinet to refer the executive decision for reconsideration.
Can we say considered rather than endorsed?
Okay.
It's for Cabinet to decide, it's not for us to suggest.
Be considered. And yeah.
Do we want to say and for like a suggestion of what to do with the, basically, and then you decide what you're going to do with the additional 50 million.
Exactly, and I think we need.
Leave it.
No, let's not get involved.
It was Victoria Street,
Yeah.
not the.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we can still make recommendation that they,
Just let's.
Yeah, no, look,
on.
let's keep it pure. We made the point here.
Yeah.
We gave them options
Yeah.
for the money. Let's keep it focused on Victoria Street. Let's not go down a road where we act as cabinet. It's not for us to pride.
we're not acting as cabinet, we're offering a recommendation, they have to take it or leave it. And I think because we said it here in committee, or during this thing, if we then follow it up by making a recommendation to say that they provide additional, use the 50 million to provide additional accommodation, it's up to them, but at least we put it there.
That the whole thing falls, if
Exactly.
they don't agree to that bit.
Tony,
But they're it's going to fall anyway because they want to provide for families.
Yeah.
So because they want to provide for families, they will reject this. They will say, no, we're
Yeah.
families.
Yeah, but Tony, the issue has been in the 50 million pounds. You're committing the organisation
Yeah, they
£50
mean,
million of interest a year, right?
yeah.
It's not just a simple case spending 50 million. The opportunity cost is, or the alternative option, we have to pay the interest payment, right? So I would rather, we made a suggestion here, right? We're here talking about Victoria Street per se. If they've got 50 million pound in the bank, they can say, that's why I asked Conrad, he can say, you know what, let's not borrow that money and our debt interest goes down. Or we can take the 50 million and give it to that scheme and get some more affordable homes. It's for them to sort that out, not for us.
Okay.
It will fall down on viability.
Yeah.
So is that the end of the recommendation then, Michael?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm happy to agree that.
Agreed. Paul agreed.
Yeah, there's a big old nod there.
Lawyer agreed.
But the only thing that
Call the vote, Tony. Tony.
that's one military, okay. Challenge it. Or I want to put it challenging management requirement.
Tony.
Recommendation, the draft wording being amended.
Then it needs to be read out again.
Again now, Tony.
Yeah, he's going to read it and then that's.
Tony, can I just suggest something? Michael read out the recommendation and you put it to a vote and we agree. Do not give him one more word, Tony. We have to keep reading the thing out. Tony, look away from the screen, please.
Is that all right?
Yeah, okay.
That makes sense now, I think.
Right, Michael, through you, Chair, can the clerk read thing? Then you put it to us and we vote on it and you don't give him any more comments.
Then the legal.
Read that from it.
We got 4 minutes, Chair. Chair, we got 4 minutes.
And this will be done in 4 minutes, Terry. You're talking a delay. Yes, Michael, go on.
Right, it's moved that the decision made by Cabinet on 5th December 2023 on Victoria Street options appraisal report preferred option be referred to Cabinet for reconsideration. 2, that the following recommendations be made to Cabinet. 2.1. That the decision made by Cabinet on 5th December 2023 on Victoria Street options appraisal report preferred option be rescinded and alternative options considered instead. 2, that the option to retain and reuse the Victoria Street site be considered to provide mixed social tenure, accommodation, homeless, single people and couples, including the identified investment in recladding and wraparound support. 2.3, that having listened and understood the challenging management requirements to support residents that might present with high needs, we recommend a mixed social tenure approach. 2.4, the Cabinet notes the key concerns of the committee include the Council's current financial situation, including the costs of temporary accommodation, as well as the current high level of social housing needs and homelessness in the borough, and believes that the current option agreed by Cabinet provides less financial and social value for money. 2.5, that the retain and reuse options paragraph 4.29 of the report to Cabinet on option 6 December 2022 be included for consideration by Cabinet.
Move to vote.
Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
I was passed at 9:43, so
Oh, good job.
And thank you. Thanks everyone for your participation. Thanks
Well done.
for staying and advising.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I'll take my leave. Good night.
Bye, Paul.
See you later.